Steve Gomez. Now you trade that for a deal with the prosecutor.
This is Walter White, and we'll get to witness in this scene how he reverts back to the person he was in just a few lines of dialogue. As the series went on, we get to know how he is a man of ego and pride, and how he would do anything to reach his goals.
Now, say my name.
But eventually, this forms a rift between him and his wife, Skylar, making her question his true goals. And yet, what makes this scene so brilliant is how it subverts the expectation of its viewers by making Walter White human again, a payoff that solidifies his character as one of the most well-written characters in all of TV. But how did a team of writers pull off this feat? How did they make Walter White start as a meek individual to a drug kingpin and eventually having a mix of the two? But before that, let's get some context. To understand Walter White, we need to see his motivations. See, it's no secret that Walter White is an egoistic man. He seems to always put himself in the conversation to the point where it gets very comedic.
You didn't follow my instructions!
Oh, well, Heil Hitler, bitch!
This whole thing, all of this, it's all about me.
But more importantly, ego is his driving force, whether he likes it or not. But there was a limit. Before Walt finally embarked on this journey to tie up the loose ends of his life, he first didn't want to. After losing his hard-earned cash, his family disowning him, and the world seeing him as this great Heisenberg, his only motivation to keep going was to give his last remaining money to his only son. And we all know how that went.
Just die!
Defeated and finally without a reason to keep going, he was ready to take himself in, so much so that he had called the police. But as I've said earlier, ego is the driving force of Walter White. Family, money, or even power are simply second order for him. Yet again, this man's fragile ego was broken by the very first people who broke it in the first place.
The company name.
The company name. As far as I can recall, his contribution begins and ends right there.
Gretchen and Elliot were the people that Walt saw as his biggest regret. This was showcased in Season 5, Episode 6, Buyout. In this scene, Walt talks to Jesse and we finally get to know why he had such a grudge against these people. Because at a crucial time in his life, he was bought out for a fraction of what his value was. Which in turn became the repeating life cycle of Walter White. The repeating cycle of settling.
Jesse, have you heard of a company called Gray Matter? Well, I co-founded it in grad school with a couple of friends of mine. Now we were going to take the world by storm. Care to guess what that company is worth now? Billions, with a B. And I sold my share, my potential, for $5,000.
What's interesting is that in the same scene, we get to know the true intentions of Walt, building an
Empire business.
a hint that Walt didn't want money, he wanted to validate his potential. This was just one of the times when we can see how he was undervalued and how he undervalued himself. But chronologically, this was the very first instance of it. At least the very first that we as the audience know. But why does Walt settle in the first place? We as the audience get to know that Walter White, at first, accepted the reality that he is someone who is very much capable but is incapable because of certain unwanted circumstances.
Doctor, my wife is 7 months pregnant with a baby we didn't intend. My 15-year-old son has cerebral palsy. I am an extremely overqualified high school chemistry teacher.
In other words, Walt's habit of settling was formed by the constant exchanges factors that he can't control. But as the series went on, he eventually got rid of the mindset of settling, forming a brand new persona that's the opposite of settling, Heisenberg. Persona that has the mindset of egoism, a concept that places oneself as the motivation for action, which Walt eventually uses to fuel his meth empire.
I am the one who knocks.
Old Walt, seeing his contributions to this billion-dollar company being simplified into this measly brand name, would have probably settled. He would have probably let Gretchen and Elliot off the hook, but Heisenberg, born out of egoism, chose to act. Which gets us back to this scene. During the first few minutes of Walt and Skylar's conversation, we get to know that Heisenberg is in control. Cranston delivers his lines with the fierce tenacity that he uses in his Heisenberg scenes.
You trade that for a deal with the prosecutor. You get yourself out of this.
In his few lines, we immediately know what his purpose for meeting with Skylar is, to give Skylar another chance by giving her a possible deal with the prosecutors through Hank and Gobi's bodies. This is painted as a final gift of Walt to Skylar, not through any sort of money or anything like that, but just a chance for a restart on her life. And finally, Walt gets to say that this again was something he did for the family, something that he always, I mean always, brings up.
I earned that money. Me!
This act of constantly saying that he was the provider by virtue an act out of ego as well. The concept of not providing for his family was always a tough subject for Walt. Somehow, in his twisted, egoistic mind, this is a reflection of his potential as a person. We can see this in how he was embarrassed when his peers assumed he was a professor at the university.
I gravitated toward education.
Ah, what university?
Or how he felt when Hank and Elliot offered to pay for his cancer treatment, or most bluntly, on how he actually refused to acknowledge the efforts of his son for finding a way to support his treatment.
Cyberbegging. That's all that is.
And yet, when he was to say that, again, everything that he did was for him to live up to his potential and be the providing husband and father he knows he could be,
You need to understand.
I have to hear one more time that you did this for the family.
Skylar refused to hear it. This was a pivotal moment for her. Finally, after 5 seasons of giving Walt the benefit of the doubt, of always prioritizing the family's welfare over hers, she gained autonomy. An autonomy to finally stand up for herself and question the actions of her husband. And yet, Walt admits the truth.
I did it for me. I liked it. I was good at it. I was alive.
Up until this point in time, it was his ego. It was the Heisenberg persona that kept him going with his drug empire. In his mind, it was also the thing that justified his constant lies to his family, that he was ultimately doing this for the sake of their future. Yet, looking back at what the previous things we've talked about, this inherently is an act of settling, an act of finally being honest with not only himself, but also the person he has continuously lied to over and over again. Anagan brings Skylar's actions to life here. Skylar's surprised look from Walt's revelation and the subsequent peace of mind that was painted on her face, eventually letting out a sigh of relief. This shows the growth that Skylar has been through throughout the 5 seasons. After Walt constantly lying to her face, hearing the truth, even if it hurts, brings her more relief than 1,000 lying Walts. And Walt did this not through ego, but with the act of settling. Settling with his wife about his true intentions, and settling with his ego that he did this for himself. We consider nuance in Cranston's performance. It's a mix of the confident yet soft tone that we saw Walt in flashback scenes, and the fierce tenacious one of Heisenberg. These simple lines of dialogue are perfectly built up across 5 seasons, and it could have failed horribly if the scenes of this revelation were implanted as far as the very beginning of the series. Walt's very first conflict is how he was determined to give up his life to cancer, because an attempt to cure his disease at this stage would only leave his family with unsurmountable debt, and him dead, not only literally, but also figuratively. Again, in this instance, he was ready to settle with his disease and not fight any longer, and as expected, his family disagrees. This can be seen as another way of persons getting the best of him, of people trying to take away his autonomy. But through the discovery of his newfound way to provide a stable source of income even after his death, Walt chose not to settle, but to try.
I'll do the treatment.
This was Walt's very first instance of finally breaking out of his shell. Yet, Walt's state at the very end of the season is the exact opposite of what his settled future would have been. Walt, having tested the capabilities of his intellect and his chemical prowess, can rest knowing that he has left money for his family, and him, while still being dead literally, is alive figuratively. He achieved all of this not through what we expect from him, maybe a force of ego and will that we'll constantly see throughout the whole series, but not in this scene. He ultimately achieves his goal by reverting back to his settling ways. The transformation of Walter White from a settling chemistry teacher to an egoistic drug kingpin is already an impressive writing feat in and of itself. But topping that transformation with this little subtle detail makes the payoff of this scene that much more satisfying. And then, this scene concluded with Walt ideally watching both his children. If I had to describe these final moments, it would be bittersweet. The final times where Walt gets to see the two people whom he hinged all of his initial motivations on, and yet, Just like Flynn or Holly realizes Walt was watching, they're unbeknownst to the money that their father has left them. These final seconds didn't have any dialogue. In fact, it didn't need it. It doesn't feature an overly dramatic monologue on how Walt would have wanted to see them grow up or what he did was for them. It was just quiet, and that's all the audience needs to know. This is what made this scene so perfectly well written. Yes, you could look at it face value and say that it's a well-directed, well-acted, and well-written scene, but in retrospect, it was built up from the very beginning. To the process of 5 whole seasons, we not only see the descent of Walter White's humanity into the drug business, but also his slight realignment with morality by virtue of his family. Bravo, Vince.